Welcome to the HoosLeft podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the Hoosier left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington. In this episode, I want to talk about some concepts that have become increasingly divisive in the last few years: diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'll start with this introduction from Nicole Terry Ellis in a CNN article from this March. Quote, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs have come under attack in boardrooms, state legislatures, and college campuses across the country. Since 2023, 81 anti-DEI bills that target programs at colleges have been introduced in 28 states and in Congress, according to a tally by the Chronicle of Higher Education. 8 have been signed into law in states like Texas and Florida, and I will interject a note here, also Indiana. A 2023 survey by the Pew Research Center found that 52% of employed U.S. adults say they have DEI trainings or meetings at work, and 33% say they have a designated staff member who promotes DEI. But recently, some companies have slashed teams dedicated to DEI, and wealthy corporate leaders such as Bill Ackman and Elon Musk have made posts on social media that decried diversity programs. Critics say DEI programs are discriminatory and attempt to solve racial discrimination by disadvantaging other groups, particularly white Americans. But supporters and industry experts insist the decades-old practice has been politicized and is widely misunderstood. End quote. Later in the article, Ellis talks about the history of such efforts which go back decades. Quote, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed employment discrimination based on race, religion, sex, color, and national origin. It also banned segregation in public spaces like public schools and libraries. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act established the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, which works to eliminate employment discrimination. In the 1960s and 70s, employees began filing discrimination lawsuits with the EEOC, and many companies began incorporating diversity into their business strategies by providing diversity training, according to a 2008 report published in the Academy of Management Learning and Education. These diversity training efforts emerged around the time that affirmative action began by executive order from President John F. Kennedy. Although the two concepts may seem similar, affirmative action is different from DEI because it required federal contractors by executive order from the president to treat all applicants and employees equally based on race, color, religion, and sex. Colleges and universities also used affirmative action to boost enrollment of students of color at majority white schools, but last year, the Supreme Court gutted affirmative action, ruling that race-conscious college admissions were unconstitutional because the court is dominated by 6 far-right religious extremist racist ideologues. End quote. Okay, I added that last part. But in 2020, the murder of George Floyd, subsequent Black Lives Matter protests, and the COVID pandemic, forcing people to stay home and read a damn book, led to a degree of self-reflection at the individual, national, and corporate levels. This prompted many organizations to implement DEI programs for the first time or expand existing programs. As is often the case in the Trump era, the backlash was swift, fierce, and wholly contrived. Far-right propagandists and agitators latched onto concepts like critical race theory, DEI, and the decades-old black slang term woke as useful cultural wedge issues. Hundreds of school board races and the successful campaign of now Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin demonstrated the political usefulness of this tactic. So that kind of sets the table, gives you an extremely brief history of DEI programs, where they originated, and why they're in the mainstream discourse now. Today's guest is one of the best in the business, and I consider myself incredibly fortunate to count him as a longtime friend. Eric Lubb spent the last 9.5 years as Director of Staff Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Notre Dame. Prior to that, he spent 10+ years as Director of Diversity Education at Indiana University, Bloomington, where I catered countless events for his office while working in the hospitality industry. In the upcoming interview, Eric and I dive into his youth growing up in distinctly not diverse locales and how that led him into his chosen field. He will explain the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll talk about the different approaches taken by a large state university and a private religious school, and the challenges of navigating both environments. Finally, we'll turn to the post-2020 backlash, its effects on Eric and his peers in the field, and the future of DEI programs. But first, I want to tell you a little story. A couple months ago, a friend of the pod, Jesse Brown, Indianapolis City Council member and all-around good guy, had me up to the Circle City to attend a 2-day training session conducted by a cadre of former Bernie Sanders field organizers. I learned a lot, had a great time, and met lots of new people. I can't thank Jesse enough. Spencer, the guy leading the training, opened with a famous and often misattributed quote from first-century Jewish scholar and Rabbi Hillel the Elder. "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? If not now, when?" And that hit me, because, in a way, I had asked myself these very questions before starting the HoosLeft project. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? I've struggled with poor self-esteem most of my life. I've made bad decisions overcompensating for it. And with the help of a therapist, and in a perfect world, everybody would have access to those kind of mental health resources. I'm still working on it. But speaking up for what I believe and publishing, putting myself out there vulnerable to the world, was a pretty good start. If I am only for myself, what am I? And this is the crux of it, right? We live in an America where authoritarianism and Christian nationalism are on the rise, where a mob boss continues to hold an uncomfortable number of our neighbors in his cultic thrall, where a corrupt Supreme Court stripped the women in my life of their right to their own bodies. I'm a cisgender, straight, white man. I would be fine. I could put my head down and ignore it, but I can't, and I won't. If not now, when? We're nearly a decade into the Trump era. Down here at the state level, Republicans have held Indiana in their python grasp for almost 20 years now. We all saw January 6th with our own eyes. We've seen family and friends lose their goddamn minds. If not now, in 2024, will there even be a when? And this is all incredibly worthwhile, a beautifully deep self-examination of one's values and living those values in an increasingly difficult world, but to this point, this has all been an internal conversation, right? When we start to bring others into this discussion, that's where change really begins. After all, this was a organization training, right? Spencer defined organizing as leadership that enables people to use what they have to get what they need. And he used a mnemonic device, the 3 Ps, to drive the message home. Who are my people? How can we organize to exercise power, which Dr. Martin Luther King defined as the ability to achieve purpose? And that's our 3rd P, purpose. a specific, concrete goal. And I've been chewing on all of this since that weekend, trying to figure out how to work it into a discussion with you, and it hit me. HoosLeft is an organizing project. Who are my people? You. What is our purpose? To build a more just, equitable, and compassionate Indiana. How can we exercise power to achieve that purpose? That's why I invite the guests I do. When we speak with candidates and elected officials, we have a direct line to those who do or might exercise the legitimate power of government on our behalf. When we speak with activists, we have opportunities to join with and or learn from their activism. When we speak with authors and experts, we broaden our knowledge base so we can better understand the larger forces at work, what we're up against. This is an organizing project. And I'm desperately trying to bring more and more elected officials, activists, and experts into our community so we and our people, our extended networks, can more effectively come together to exercise our power for our purpose of building a better Indiana. Now, unfortunately, we live in a late capitalist hellscape, and doing this work requires money. I currently work as an independent craftsman during the day and work on this project on evenings and weekends. I would love nothing more than to be able to do this work full-time to build our network of committed Hoosiers and allies. If you can, help me out with a paid subscription at scottaaronrogers.substack.com. For $5 a month or $50 a year, you can help me push our state in a better direction, and maybe if we reach critical mass, I can put down my tool belt and devote my full time to you, to this project, and to Indiana's future. I don't really put anything behind a paywall because, as author Sarah Kendzior says, it's not cool to paywall political content in a political crisis. I believe in open access to information, and your support helps make this knowledge freely available to all Hoosiers. So please, before the interview, if you have the means, pause right now, go to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. And while the best way to help this project is a financial contribution, if you can't afford it at this time, you can still help. Subscribe at the free level over on Substack. Set your favorite podcast player to auto-download new episodes of the show. Rate and review the show on whatever platform you use. Follow me on social media at facebook.com/HoosLeft. That's HOOS left. I'm also on Blue Sky at the same handle. On Instagram, Threads, and Twitter, I'm at ScottRog78. That is SCOTT78. And on Mastodon at ScottRog78 at Hoosier.social. Full episodes of the pod are now available on YouTube with clips on TikTok. The handle on both of those is at HoosLeft. Please subscribe on whichever platforms you use. But most importantly, share our message. Forward the articles to friends, family, and colleagues. Don't just like, but share on social media. Invite others to this community of Indiana leftists. Nobody is coming to save us. We've got to do it ourselves. To those who have joined this community already, especially those paid subscribers, you fill my heart and have my sincere thanks. And to everybody, thanks for listening. Now here's my interview with Eric Love. Eric Love, thank you so much for joining the HoosLeft podcast.
It's good to be here. Yeah, it's good to see you, and happy to.
I'm so glad we could finally get a chance to do this. I've been trying to make this work for like a year.
It has been a process.
So I've known Eric here for a long time, but why don't you tell our listeners here about your background? Who are you? Where are you from? And what brought you to Indiana?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Eric Love. We met when I was working at Indiana University. I was the director of staff, diversity, and inclusion on campus for 10 years, and I was a doctoral student a few years before that. I never finished my PhD, although people love to call me Dr. Love. It does have a nice ring to it, but it's I did not finish. So I I've done diversity and inclusion work my entire life, and I feel like I'm inherently made to do this type of work. I come from a diverse background, so I'm biracial and bicultural. I'm biracial because my father was African American. He passed away 8.5 years ago, and my mother is white. I am bicultural because my father was from Osceola, Arkansas, and my mother is from Liverpool, England. And I grew up in England and Idaho. And when I when I tell that story, people just laugh. Like somehow England and Idaho is hilarious, and it is. Um, and growing up in Idaho, the black population in the entire state was 0.29%. So not 1%, not a half of a percent.
I mean, I knew
More African American.
Idaho was not terribly diverse, but I didn't know it was that. Wow.
Yeah. So definitely more Latinos, like the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx population, and certainly Native American, Indigenous people. There were more of those diverse populations, but not African Americans. And of course, then I moved to Indiana, so the black population in Idaho took it. It has recovered now. It's 0.8% now. So yeah, growing up in Idaho, being a vast minority, I would ask a lot of questions, and I'd meet people, and they would say, like, "You're the first African American I've ever spoke to," and I would think, and this was like in fifth, sixth grade, I would think, if I'm the first, however this goes will determine how they treat the next one.
Yeah.
Right? So I always wanted to make sure that it was a positive. I took on this responsibility as a kid, so I always thought this how yeah. So this interaction has to be positive. So I'd answer their questions like, "Do you sunburn? Does Velcro stick to your hair?" I know I kind of look bald in online, but I still have a lot of hair in the back. Um, but Zoom always makes me look bald. People are like, "Oh, you got your hair." I'm like, "Yeah, just to receive." Not yet. I have a comb over if I need it, but so yeah. Then after I got a bachelor's degree at Boise State University, a master's degree in counseling with an emphasis in student affairs at Idaho State University, where I worked for 5 years. And I decided to work on a PhD, which brought me to Indiana University. Charlie Nelms offered me an internship or a fellowship, and so that's what sold me it on IU. Also, my fraternity, I'm a member of Kappa Alpha Psi. We were founded at Indiana University in 1911. So there was some really powerful pulls to IU, and absolutely love IU, and I love Bloomington. It was an amazing experience, the best job I've ever had. And our paths crossed at probably me doing some of the best work I ever did with open mic nights at Buffalo's. But yeah, that's a little bit of my background. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. My father passed away, as I mentioned, and my mom, after 6 years of living on her own, I convinced her to move here, and so she lives with me now.
Did you think growing up in Idaho and being in a, maybe not terribly diverse environment sort of pushed you into doing what you do?
Absolutely. One, I think as an undergrad, like I mentioned, just being a diversity educator, even as a young, in elementary school, junior high school. But at Boise State University, I got involved in cultural student organizations. So like the Black Student Alliance, there was a Native American group called Dama Soko. There was Mecha, which is a Hispanic Latino group. And I got involved in all of those. And then I worked in an office that served the student groups. And so I got to work with all of them. And I just loved it. And then I got in student government. I'm like, I love college. I'm never going to leave. and I didn't. So I just, graduated, but then I got jobs at a college or university. So I've had three major jobs in my whole career, and they've all been in D&I.
Okay.
So I
So now, and you use the term, you say D and I. Sometimes you hear DEI. Um,
Mhm.
so before we go any further, I guess I want to say let's define those concepts like
Sure.
diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll define those concepts, especially as they relate to an organization like a university or a business.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. So diversity first, I would say is the presence of ideally all diverse groups, and that's kind of impossible to define, but where we have representation of ideally a vast number of diverse groups, and everyone is treated well. I would say that's kind of simplifies it, but it's the presence of diversity. It's a presence of difference, a presence of people from different ethnic groups, different abilities, different genders, all of the above. And then I will jump to inclusion. I look at inclusion is takes a step further. So if we're at a table, we have a conference, we're in a conference room in a meeting, and there's diversity in the room. That's great. That's diversity. Inclusion is every single person at the table has a voice, and every voice is valued. So inclusion is people feel valued, they feel welcome, they feel like they belong, they're treated well, um, and so that's kind of that's how I would define inclusion. Uh, I've most recently been at Notre Dame for nearly 10 years, or a huge college sports campus. And so to use a sports analogy, maybe diversity is who's on the team, inclusion is who gets to play, right? If that helps. Then equity, and I usually say DNI, diversity and inclusion, because I worked in a structure where there was a separate office for institutional equity in human resources at Notre Dame. So we had um, associate vice president of the Office of Institutional Equity. And so while we worked together, equity was not in my portfolio. So diversity and inclusion was. But equity is the assurance that everyone has equal opportunity, has access to advancement, access to tools that they need to advance and to do their best work. Uh, and so that has to do with equity in pay, equity in opportunities for advancement and training. Yeah, all of those things. And equity also has kind of a social justice slant to it too. Make sure that justice is looked, social justice is looked at, parity in pay, opportunity, all of those things. Hopefully, I'm explaining it well.
Yeah. No, it's just good to so we're all on the same page. You and I and our listeners sort of understand what all these different
Yeah.
terms mean. So, well, tell us a little bit. Rewind. Talk about where our paths crossed, and talk a little bit about your time
Yes.
at IU, and what did you do there? What kind of programs did you put in place? What initiatives did you take on? Did you run into any problems there?
Okay. So yeah, I worked at IU from fall of 2004 to December or November of 2014. So it was 10 years, just over 10 years. And my job was director of diversity education. I worked with faculty, students, staff, administrators, and community. I just kind of was a general diversity educator for everyone. We did have different educators in specifically in the residence halls. They were called Qs, and they worked in residential life. I collaborated with them. Then we had all of the cultural centers. So we had the Neil Marshall Black Culture
Mhm.
Center, the Asian Culture Center, the La Casa Student Culture Center. We had the LGBTQ Student Support Center. Um, there was a Native American one. I also worked with the Halal Center for Jewish Hillel for Jewish students. Sometimes we worked with Muslim Student Center as well. So yeah, I had a lot of collaborators. So I worked with a lot of different people. I did ongoing diversity training. If it was faculty, I was usually working on how to manage diversity in the classroom. So to make sure, like, if someone's being disrespectful, that they can manage that. Like, you don't have to agree, but you have to treat people with dignity and respect in a classroom. It's an academic setting. This is the one place where you are assured to be able to have civil dialogue, even when you disagree. So just teaching faculty how to manage diversity in the classroom and make sure that they set the tone in the very beginning of the class on how students will engage in difference and differing opinions.
Push back on that stuff?
No. Nope. However, none of that was required by faculty. So usually faculty would request me if they would have me come in if they needed help.
So no one was there that didn't want to be there. Okay.
No. Sometimes I did some workshop for faculty with other collaborators, but for the most part, faculty would seek me out just as a consultant. Staff, I would offer maybe 1 or 2 classes a year, and maybe 12 people would sign up for those, and they had to do with diversity and inclusion. We would talk about multicultural competencies, define diversity in related terms, the benefits of diversity. We don't really talk about that enough. It's like diversity is good, like this ethereal concept. We need more diversity. Why? So we would talk about some tangible reasons why diversity is good. And there's certainly a business case scenarios where companies with more diversity bring in more revenue. People with women leaders and people of color in leadership roles bring in more revenue. They're more innovative, creative, all of those things. So there's definitely a business case. Then for students, when students see themselves reflected in staff and faculty, studies out of NESE, which is at IU, the National Survey of Student Engagement, which is at IU in Bloomington. They came up with a study that said students persist and graduate at higher rates when there are more diverse environments. It doesn't mean that you can't be successful if you're a diverse student in a less diverse population, but generally speaking, diverse students do better in more diverse populations. And then other studies show that diversity on campus is beneficial for all students. Just to see, we have white students, like that might be from Idaho. I grew up in majority of predominantly white areas. Like, it's good for them to help them prepare for a increasingly diverse workforce and neighborhoods, living, companies, all of those things. It prepares you for life, which is getting more increasingly diverse. On from there.
Yeah, well, that's a good breaking point, I guess, because I was going to ask about Notre Dame. Now it's dependent on how fast you drive. It's maybe 3 hours from Bloomington to South Bend, but culturally, the campuses have got to be like completely different.
Absolutely. Although I would say kind of equally beautiful, but in different ways. Though IU and Notre Dame are 2 of the most beautiful campuses in the country, in my opinion. I've traveled a lot. There's a couple others that I think are striking. Utah State is right at the base of a mountain, and that's beautiful. But the architecture at Notre Dame, but the limestone, the river, or creek through the campus at IU, just 2 beautiful campuses. But yeah, definitely different. A private Catholic institution that's actually much smaller. 8,000 undergrads, 12,000 and 4,000 graduate students for a total of 12,000. And those numbers have been increasing a little bit over the time that I was there, where IU, when I left, was at like 43,000 students, and it might be much more now. So yeah, so very, very different. IU generally pretty liberal, and some would think that that Notre Dame is like just super right wing or super conservative, and there are definitely conservative people there, but there's a lot of liberal people as well. So I find that Catholic social teachings, Catholic ethic of we're all made in the image of God. So how can you mistreat someone who's made in the image of God? And so I found that my work aligned very well with Catholic ideology. And so I arrived. I said I am not Catholic, but I love Catholic doctrine when it comes to how we treat each other. And Catholicism is one of the most diverse religions in the world. So let's give it a run. And I absolutely loved it. People clapped. I was never, we would have monthly mass for a long time in HR. I also worked for the first time in just human resources with staff. So I didn't work with students or faculty. And so that was a change to, I quickly became an advisor for a student group because I
couldn't stay away.
no offense
Too young.
to staff, but I have to have my interaction with students. And so, so I did that, but I was received very well. I would go to mass. You didn't have to. Sometimes I wouldn't go, but oftentimes I went. And I don't know if you've been to mass, but they do. When people go up for communion, if you're not Catholic, you just cross your arms like this, and then you get a blessing. You don't take communion. You let them know I'm not Catholic, but I want a blessing, and so the priest would bless you. It's also like Wakanda forever. So it just works for me, and I loved it. Also, my first year there, my father had been sick for quite a while with cancer. And so when I first arrived, there's a staff chaplain that would come by once a week and just check on me. How are you doing? How's your dad? How's mom? How's mom? Because she's taking care of dad. So just, I was just blown away by the kindness and the goodness of the place. And most people, I would say 95%, of the people there are just so genuinely kind. And then the other 5%, not so much. But that's anywhere. I mean, I think the percentage
absolutely,
is
nowhere is
no neighbor
for sure.
Great, right. Great place to work. I love my colleagues at Notre Dame. So and actually when my father was on his deathbed, he just had like a day or two to live, essentially. The same priest called my house. We put him on speakerphone. He did a Catholic prayer and then a non-denominational blessing for my dad. And my dad perked up. It was a moving experience. So that's one of my favorite moments of being connected with Notre Dame, was having Father James Brackey. He's since retired. He's still here, but when my mom moved here, my mom adopted him. He had lost his mom, so my Father Brackey is now my brother because he was. My mom just kind of adopted him, so we need to have him over for dinner soon. It was a great transition. One thing I loved working in human resources, I asked my boss, "Can I mandate training for staff?" He said, "Absolutely, yeah. Like, let's go." So I mentioned earlier, I would train like 12 people a year, or maybe 24. I trained over 5,000 people at Notre Dame in the last 9.5 years, and it was mandated, it was required. Sometimes there was a pushback, but we'd just get them to come anyway. There could have been a few people that fell through the cracks, but we trained a vast majority of all staff. I remember someone said, "I don't need your training. I have a grandson who's part Japanese, and so I'm immersed in diversity all the time. I don't need your training." And I know, but just think how much you can bring to the table if you're in there sharing stories about your family. It would be so impactful if you came and just shared, so I got them to come. But yeah, you don't become anti-racist or a diversity expert by proximity.
Yeah.
You actually have to work at it. So we had some pushback, but for the most part, people really, really loved the workshops. And I think one part of my approach is I have been to workshops. I'll over-exaggerate just to make a point, but the presenter might go to the front of the room and say, "Welcome, today we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion. we're going to find out who amongst you are racist. We're going to deconstruct racism, find out who amongst you are racist. Ma'am, you look like you're probably racist. And like, it would be like, what? And they would just run, right? I've been in workshops where it was so
Wow.
uncomfortable, people would get called out. So I over exaggerated for a point. That's not my workshop. I like to ease people in. We do some icebreakers.
Yeah.
We define diversity. We start to move in, and I think sometimes if we're talking about microaggressions, people can say racist things without themselves actually being,
Yeah. Yeah.
or sex, like someone's, I'm not sexist. I just said, no, relax. Nobody said you were sexist, but what you said was offensive to several
Yeah.
people. So, well, yeah, that doesn't define who you are, but we need to make sure we don't do that again, because that's inclusion. We want them to feel included, and the microaggressions are an excellent way of getting people to not feel valued or welcomed or included. So, and microaggressions are just small acts of indignities or um, comments, slights, snubs, um, that give you messages to underrepresented groups that you don't belong or you shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And that can,
Yeah, a lot of times people grew up in a time or a place, or it was things were a certain way where they're from, and they don't know. They come to the table with all their baggage, and it's like, oh, I didn't know that I'm not supposed to say that thing.
yeah.
But so like, no, I mean, Notre Dame it's a unique place, right? I mean, it was a safe space where, like, you think, 100 years ago in this country, Catholics were a marginalized people,
Absolutely.
and then in the 60s, the university president, Father Hesburgh, walked the social gospel. He marched with Dr. King. So it's always been a very progressive place in that way. But then, on the other side, right, we were talking about, like, the really conservative law school. You got, Amy Coney Barrett's from there.
And she's not the most
No,
the most conservative. She's not the most conservative at the law school. There's even more conservative. Pretty conservative.
so did you run Supreme Court Amy Coney Barrett through a diversity training?
I did not, because she's faculty and I only trained staff. So I didn't. I did some workshops for faculty with a colleague of mine who was the director of academic diversity and inclusion. So we would collaborate sometimes, but those workshops are not mandated. You generally don't make faculty do anything except for
Yeah,
teach and write and
do
do certain-
anything.
Yeah. So yeah, she was never in a workshop. But yeah, you were absolutely right on many. Yeah, there's definitely conservative pockets here as well. A lot of that has to do with reproductive rights.
Yeah.
And I'm comfortable. I've always been kind of anti-abortion, but pro-choice. And it's just not like, I wouldn't, if I got someone pregnant, I wouldn't want an abortion. I would want us to have the child, even if I took it myself or whatever the situation might be. So but I'm pro-choice. Like my personal view, I don't superimpose it on others. But being at a Catholic institution that long, when you talk to people, if you really believe, Catholics believe that a soul is in place at the moment of inception. So the very moment someone gets pregnant, there's a soul in there. And so that's why they value unborn children so much, is because they believe that there's a soul. And so when I think of that, it's like, wow, that's really deep. Like, I understand. But what I don't like is, and this isn't necessarily Catholics, but some people are pro-life until birth. Then if the child is born gay or black or disabled, then we want to discard them, and they don't have the same level of respect and love that they had as a fetus. And so what I love about the Catholic Church, and not just Notre Dame, but the Catholic Church, and Notre Dame does do this as well, but um, they help with adoptions. They'll pay for adoptions. They help. They have these huge adoption agencies, and so if I wanted to apply for an adoption, Notre Dame as an employee, they would pay for, I don't know what the percentage is, but quite a bit of it. So they not only do they espouse like pro-life, but they help with adoptions, and so like have the baby and then we'll find a better home for it or whatever the situation might be. So I love when an institution actually backs it, but other people's like, oh, we have to have this fetus and then a baby's born and it's black or disabled or whatever, and or even poor, and we don't want to take care of it anymore. So pro-life until birth.
Yes. Yeah.
That's yeah.
So, in addition to the reproductive rights stuff, did what was the state of LGBTQ inclusion on campus? Were there programs in place there? Just in general, what's the culture like in terms of inclusivity?
Yeah, I think that we definitely have some challenges. We Notre Dame has some. I actually no longer work at Notre Dame, by the way, as of last week. And but we came a long way together while I was there, and there's still some work that needs to be done. There is a LGBTQ student group that's called Spectrum. Oh no, it's called Prism. Um, and so Prism is like a triangle with light coming through it, and you can see the
We've all listened to Dark Side of the Moon here. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then that's maybe the best image of a prism. And then we also have a faculty and staff organization that's called Spectrum. So there was a colleague that I had at IU who was openly gay, and then he came to Notre Dame, and he wanted to start an LGBT employee resource group. And I was in charge of those. We didn't have one, so I wanted to start one. So I went to the president's cabinet, and it was the president's oversight committee for diversity and inclusion. So I brought it up there. We were starting the Black Faculty and Staff Association. They were already on campus, but we were trying to make them an official ERG and starting like a women's group that ultimately became Thrive, Young Leaders. So they started to form. Someone wanted a gay group. So the president, Father John Jenkins, who was an amazing guy, but very thoughtful, really smart. He's like, benchmark and see what other Catholic institutions have an employee resource group that's LGBTQ. And then, as you can expect, the ones who are more liberal, like Boston College and Georgetown, they would have it, but more conservative ones wouldn't. We're Holy Cross. We're founded by Brothers of the Holy Cross. We're a Holy Cross campus. And I've been told that we're like middle to conservative. So we're not a liberal sect of Catholicism, is what I've been told. I don't, but there's just really compassionate, caring people there. So Father John said that I think, I'm comfortable with this happening on campus as long as, well, he didn't ask me what the purpose of the group would. I said, I think they just want to be valued. They just wanted people to know they're here. They want to be valued as employees and as a part of the Notre Dame community. He was concerned that they would challenge Catholic doctrine or make protests or things like that. And at the time, where it was like, absolutely not. They just want to be valued and be known that they're here. And so we got the green light and started Spectrum, and I've been a member and involved from the beginning. And they've done some really good stuff. But again, it's not without challenges. Last year, a student group wanted to bring a contestant from RuPaul's Drag Race to do a drag show at a cultural event. So, there's like cultural food and different performances from different cultures. But for the LGBTQ group, they were not allowed to bring a drag queen on campus. So that was canceled. But then later, an academic department sponsored a conference about drag drag culture and drag queens, and so they did have a show, but you had to be involved in the class one way or another. And there were protests outside, but there were protests of the protesters,
Yeah.
and so it was interesting, but it was all very cordial, basically. And I wasn't in the class, so I didn't go to the show, but I love good drag shows. Drag queens are someone I have a quick wit, but I am no match for drag
Oh
queens.
no,
So I just
Bloomington's got a
and
great drag scene here.
yeah, yeah, and don't sit in the front row at a drag show though, unless
We'll
you're really
participate.
good.
um, so that was last year, and it sounds like things were, there was some protests, but things were generally cordial. How was
Yeah.
2020 with protests? Well, now I guess a lot of students were probably off campus for that with COVID, but were there?
Yeah. So yeah, I 2020 was a tough. It was a tough time, but especially with I mean it was hard enough with COVID, but then the murder of George Floyd, and um, so for Juneteenth that year, the football team wanted to have a march for racial justice, and they got the permits on campus. They did a big march. They had a rally. I remember the head coach at the time, Brian Kelly, marched with them, and then they kneeled and put their fist up in the air. And I was really moved by that. And Brian, I keep looking at your picture instead of looking up at the camera. So Brian, yeah, Brian Kelly. There was a picture of they posted that on the like ND football website, and then all
Yeah.
these people were attacking him like, "This is a disgrace. I've had season tickets for 40 years, and I'll never come to another game." And so then I would chime in and say, "I've never had season tickets, so I'll buy yours, and that way we won't miss you." So I'm like an online adventure. I don't use Eric Love as my. I have some alter egos that I can let people have it. I'm still pretty polite, but like your tickets will not be missed. I will buy season tickets.
They're hard to come
Please.
by up there, even after the stadium expansion. Yeah.
They are, but if you work on campus, then you get a few days advance access to tickets. So um, I've just lost that privilege, but I'm okay. I like to watch. My mom and I love watching on TV. Like she doesn't like big crowds anymore. I love the tailgate.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Tailgate culture. Oh my gosh, tailgate culture at Notre Dame is amazing, and people are pretty friendly. I would walk by and like, hey, come over, have a beer. I don't drink, but I'll have a hot dog or a brat or whatever. And so yeah, people were very friendly, and so I love that. Wow.
Yeah, that year broke a lot of people's brains. And
Yeah.
so, in the couple years since then, really the far right has come out and made programs like you teach, DEI initiatives. Uh they've attacked these and made it a centerpiece
Mhm.
of their argument. You got guys like Chris Rufo, very dangerous little weasel of an individual, and Charlie Kirk, and then you've got billionaires like Bill Ackman and Elon Musk getting in there with attacks on DEI efforts. So, like Ackman said, uh, quote, DEI is inherently a racist and illegal movement in its implementation, even if it purports to work on behalf of the so-called oppressed, end quote. And Musk, uh, son of an apartheid-era South African emerald mine owner and owner of the world's most punchable face, said, quote, DEI is just another word for racism. Shame on anyone who uses it. Continuing DEI because it discriminates on the basis of race, gender, and many other factors is not merely immoral, it is also illegal. End quote. What would you say to these clowns? Like how would you get it through their thick punchable faces that they're Why are they so wrong?
Yeah. So my vote for the most punchable face is probably Mitch McConnell. but
At this point, I
but
don't know. It's like I would feel bad because
yeah, not he's just too old. I couldn't actually do it. Yeah, and he can't fight back without freezing or whatever. So it wouldn't be fair. But he's been my least favorite person forever. Um, yeah. So while all these protests and marches are going, I kept saying, register and vote. Come on, register and vote. Vote. Like, get it together, organize. We have to get this together. And in the meantime, Republicans get scared. Like, the status quo is going to change. People have shifted, and now they're in favor of minorities and social justice and all this stuff. So then they start coming up with talking points to kind of degrade, degrade. The name is just the word's not popping into my head, but yeah, they're like destroying this movement, saying it's critical race theory. They're making white kids hate themselves and hate our country. They're teaching critical race theory to our kids, or turning them into drag queen. All
Yeah.
whatever was liberal, they just started attacking, throwing things on the wall to see what would stick, and then it started to stick with some people. There were also a lot of right wing people who were in disguise in the marches, and then they went instigate violence or destruction. So they have these very civil, disciplined organizers of some of these marches and protests, and then someone would come in a black mask and throw, a brick through a window, and then people jump in and start looting. But that was not the organizers. So that wasn't Black Lives Matter. It wasn't the people who were actually trying to do that, but it was intentional and it worked. So then we get this huge, like the pendulum just keeps swinging, right? So it's swung in favor of justice. And then the Republicans are like, oh my God, if those people get power, they might
Like, hell you did.
beat it down. Which would be terrifying for someone like, they have treated a lot of people really poorly.
Mm-hmm.
And so most people don't want revenge. They just want an opportunity. They just want the same opportunities, the same access to, to what makes America a great place to live. And so, so deconstructing, mislabeling critical race theory. Like, we're teaching critical race theory in K through 12. We are not. It's an advanced graduate. It's a law school concept, and then some higher education, like people in higher ed administration. Not all higher ed degrees, but higher ed administration. They dabble in critical race theory as a way of looking at laws and systems that adversely affect people of color. So there are some tenets to it. But it's just a lens to look at some of the laws that take place in the U.S. that have passed, like lining districts. How Black people can't buy houses on certain parts of the of a town, and then you can't get a loan to buy houses in the part of town that they could live in, and it keeps the Black neighborhood, Latino neighborhoods, keeps their houses from appreciating while the other houses appreciate at these astronomical levels. And the way that we could build family wealth or generational wealth is usually through buying a house or real estate. And so again, decade after decade after decade, generation after generation, there are United States laws that prevented people from gaining the same wealth. And there's just so many examples.
Still feeling the effects of these things now. And that's what the critical race theory is doing, is examining all these systemic issues from that built up on top of each other over the years, and a lot of the conservatives want to say, well, hey, racism's over. We had the civil rights movement. Look, Obama was president. Everything's hunky dory. Why are you complaining?
They try to do everything to prevent him from being a successful president. So yes, you are absolutely right with that. Then we get this backlash, and it left me reeling. Like, I just cannot believe that people are listening to this. Like, critical race, I know what critical race theory is, and I'm like, I've never even used it in my work. Now I will embrace it because if they want to call it out, I'm like, fine, this is what it is. This is what it isn't. I've even had workshops at Notre Dame, like critical race theory,
Mm.
what it is and what it isn't. Like,
Did the
and
culture on like campus around like critical race theory and DEI and stuff change, after 2020, 21, when these things started to be used as political attacks?
yeah, I would say immediately during 2020, like everyone else, Notre Dame started examining their ourselves. So they had the board of trustees initiated a study, and then they came up with a framework for diversity and equity and inclusion that we started to follow. The president came out with statements. The president and his staff sponsored a program and kind of a rally, not a protest, but um, they had student guest speakers, different speakers, and we all marched together wearing masks to the grotto, lit candles, and had some prayers. And we did it in a Notre Dame way, right? That's and Notre Dame being a private institution, they regulate what kind of protests you can have. And so you usually get like 15 minutes, and it's in a little corner. And if you go beyond that, there could be adverse effects.
What about last year in 2023, the Supreme Court effectively banned affirmative action in college admissions. Now, I don't know if that was just public schools or include private schools as well. Is Notre Dame still committed to enrolling a culturally diverse student body?
Yes. So I never did work in admissions, and so I don't know as much as someone that works there. But I would say over the last 4 years, each year the incoming freshman class has been more diverse than the previous. So every year we're becoming more and more diverse, and but that's international
Yeah.
students, Latino, Hispanic, Asian, all of the above, African American, African. We have a large African, first generation African immigrants are our large population of our Black population on campus. I don't know if that makes
Yeah, yeah.
sense. Um, yeah. So, and that's everywhere. Um, but absolutely, Notre Dame is committed to continuing to increase their diversity. Not only was representation in faculty, students, and staff part of the framework that our board of trustees came up with, but our new provost did his strategic plan, and he wants Notre Dame to more closely reflect the Catholic population around the world. And so it is very important to them. It's important to maintain their Catholic character, but also important to continue to increase more diversity, have more representation in faculty and staff as well as students, and to our mission is to be a powerful force for good in the world. That's part of the Notre Dame mission, and part of my mission was to make sure that we knew the world, so we were a powerful force for good, not just a powerful force.
Yeah.
And by having faculty and staff and students from all over the world coming here, like that's part of the mission too, is to make sure that we are doing good work on in the name of Our Lady, Notre Dame. That's what Notre Dame means, Our Lady. So yeah, so to answer your question in all that long around about way is yes, diversity, especially in student populations, it has been affected in some ways because we have some federal funding, and so there are some regulations that we have to do, and like IU and other places change the names of events. Like you might be familiar with the groups program, which was initially was underrepresented groups, so Latinos, African Americans, but then they had to change the rules, and so it was at high risk.
Yeah.
Rural students were involved as well. Okay.
So I want to turn to um, the state legislature a little bit, and we talked about Republican
Yeah.
and their fuckery, if I may. So, uh,
It's your show.
Governor Holcomb signed SB 202 the spring, and it was basically lifted verbatim from Florida, their Stop Woke Act, right? So, under the guise of allowing conservative students to feel more comfortable on campus. This law basically requires colleges and universities to report their DEI spending annually. It amends the duties of public universities' diversity committees to foster not cultural diversity, but intellectual diversity. And it all but eliminates tenure and academic freedom by instituting these 5-year reviews on all faculty and whether they're meeting this intellectual diversity, right? And there's a reporting system for professors. It's a mess. So
It's horrible.
I mean, let's be clear to what they really mean here, right? When they say intellectual diversity, they're saying that racism is equally valid as anti-racism. They're saying that Holocaust denial is the equivalent to actual history. That biblical story of Genesis is just as good as Darwin's theory of evolution, and that spontaneous generation is as good as germ theory, right? Like that's intellectual diversity in their eyes, right? That this anti-vax
Right.
junk is the equivalent to volumes and volumes and volumes of peer-reviewed science. Um, that is only applying to the state colleges and universities, as I understand.
Yeah.
And all of the other leadership at IU and Purdue, Ball State, Indiana State, USI, Ivy Tech, Vincennes, all the state schools, came out really strongly against it. DePaul, a private school, came out against the bill, even though it doesn't affect them. Did Notre Dame take an official stance on SB 202?
That's a great question. I know that some faculty were writing letters towards it, but I don't know if like Father John or if our administration did an official response. I am uncertain. To be
Yeah.
late. Yeah, I didn't hear of it, so it could be that they did not, but I don't know.
Your now former colleagues at Notre Dame may be concerned that this is coming for them?
Mm-hmm. Yes, because it's so widespread. Like a lot of us had colleagues that in one day all the DI people were fired in
Yeah.
Florida, right? And so, and some in Texas, and so it's spreading. Um, yeah, it absolutely makes no sense because I think that there is a concern that this is happening across the country, that it's starting to take hold in Indiana, and it's affecting our colleagues in public institutions, and who knows how much it might affect us in private institutions.
What do you envision as the future of like DEI programs in university settings and colleges and in business? Um, are are we going to get through this and still value diversity and inclusion as a culture on the other side, or is this only going to get worse?
That's a great question. Part of me thinks it'll get worse before it gets better, but I do think it'll get better. But those of us who are in the trenches working on D&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we know the value of it. We know the results of it. We know what it really does. My work is not designed to make someone feel guilty or bad about themselves, but I also think that we need to know our history and be honest about it so we don't repeat it. We have been an absolute racist country. We have racist policies. We have white supremacist policies, and that doesn't mean that everybody white thinks that they're better than everybody else. It means that we have favored white people throughout the history of our country. And so that is real. It's tangible. It's history. It's it happened. I think that we need to discuss that. Don't forget it and make sure that we do better moving into the future. So I think that people in my field need to articulate what it means, what our hopes are, what the real purpose of DE and I is, and stop letting other people hijack the narrative and convince, poor white Americans that DE and I is trying to destroy their very souls and their, It just makes no sense what the the amount of negative that they put on things that are absolutely positive. I think for our society. Um, I'm hopeful. Maybe I'll play a role in in better articulating the purpose and the reasons and the benefits of the DEI programs. Who knows? But somebody's got to do something.
It's heavy times, and I wish there's a whole lot of people that could learn a whole lot from you. Could probably
Thank you.
stand to take one of your courses there.
I'm available.
Yes,
I do. You guys are meant.
Indiana General Assembly Republicans, call this man. You need his services. You don't know you do, but you do.
Yeah, I'll also say I have a very good friend that works for the governor. Kara Herring is the chief equity officer for the state of Indiana. We work together at Notre Dame. She's she's brilliant. She does great work. Even like I like Eric Holcomb. I like our governor most of the time. I've disagreed with some things.
You
But
can do worse.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think he's a decent guy, and I think that he listens when people talk to him about these issues. Like the legislature did stuff on transgender athletes, and I don't think he supported that. So some things, he's a Republican, but he's not a MAGA. Like he's not ridiculous. Like he's sensible. I think he's more of a true Republican, and we can work with that. All right. So I actually like the governor. I respect him. I don't agree with everything. And my colleague, my good friend that works for him, I don't agree with everything with her, but I love what she's doing. She's making a difference. So yes, I absolutely would do a workshop. I would do a workshop for Republicans. No, I don't know. I absolutely. If they called me, I would even give them a discount. Like, let's just talk. Come on, like let's talk. We're not even talking. That's another part of the problem. We don't communicate with each other. We don't talk. We're in our silos. We're in our algorithms online. I click all the liberal stuff, and I'm fed more liberal stuff. So we never even get an alternate view. You have to actively seek it. I can't watch Fox News, but I can read the Wall Street Journal and things like that. I like BBC America. I remember I said, is it Al Jazeera? Is that the
Well, Al Jazeera is probably one of the best news organizations in the world right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm in a meeting with people. I'm like, I like BBC America. I like Al Jazeera. Oh my God, they're terrorists. I'm like no, it's like they're not. It's a news story. It's a it's a new and yeah. I don't know who they thought it was, but they thought
Yeah, and it's like, on one hand, all you can do is laugh, but on the other hand, it's like, oh my God, these people's vote count for the same as mine.
absolutely. Anything we didn't cover that we need to...
You know what? We covered all my questions. Did I miss anything?
Trying to think if there's some existential wisdom that I have. I guess I would just say, yeah, my assumption is that most of your listeners are liberal. We have to get it together, people. I'd like some substantive change. We have to be strategic. We have to get people to vote. We have to organize. We have to educate people about all of the issues really. And not just talking points, but the information behind the talking points. We have to look at judges. We have to look at, like have forums and go over the platforms and really like inform people. If people are truly informed, liberals will win. I just think they will, even in Indiana.
Yeah. Oh no, I absolutely agree. Yeah, it's a lot of lot of resources are spent to make sure people don't have the truth and that the playing field's not fair.
Absolutely.
So it's unfortunate.
Check. I think
Eric, well,
yeah, we should have one more thing. We should have election day should be off. Like nobody should have to work on election day
yes,
except for the volunteers.
yes,
It should be a national holiday so people can vote. It's a democracy, supposedly a democracy. So the more people that vote, the better. And we don't want that. And so I wish we could work on that too. All right, that was my last thing.
It's Eric Love. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of this time that you've given me tonight. Loved having you on here on the HoosLeft podcast.
So good to see you again. Keep up the great work. I appreciate you. I love you. Thank you so much.
Eric.
Thanks for having me.
Night.
All right. Take care.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Eric Love. Until very recently, the Director of Staff Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Notre Dame, and prior to that, Director of Diversity Education at Indiana University. You know, it's a rare occasion when I speak approvingly of billionaires. By this point, we've all seen the meme from Twitter user Mikel Gillette. Quote, okay, how about this? No more billionaires. None. After you reach $999 million, every red cent goes to schools and healthcare. You get a trophy that says, I won capitalism, and we name a dog park after you. End of quote. Yes, that is how I feel about billionaires. But in a world where they do exist, you could do a lot worse than IU grad Mark Cuban, the entrepreneur, investor, former principal owner and current minority owner of the NBA's Dallas Mavericks, and reality TV star from ABC's Shark Tank. In a January spat on the site formerly known as Twitter with that site's man-baby owner Elon Musk, Cuban said the following about the value of DEI in business. Quote, 1. Diversity. Good businesses look where others don't, to find the employees that will put your business in the best possible position to succeed. You may not agree, but I take it as a given that there are people of various races, ethnicities, orientation, etc. that are regularly excluded from hiring consideration. By extending our hiring search to include them, we can find people that are more qualified. The loss of DEI-phobic companies is my gain. 1A, we live in a country with very diverse demographics. In this era where trust of businesses can be hard to come by, people tend to connect more easily to people who are like them. Having a workforce that is diverse and representative of your stakeholders is good for business. 2. Equity. Treating people equally does not mean treating them the same. I made this mistake for a lot of years thinking it did. Equity is a core principle of business. Put your employees in a position to succeed. Recognize their differences and play to their strengths wherever possible. It is not a hard concept, but it is not easy to implement. Most workforces don't have the depth of management to do this well. When it's not done well, it can create tension and resentment. 3. Inclusion. One of my favorite sayings is that great employees reduce the stress of those around them. Great companies create environments that reduce unnecessary stress of their employees. I'm not talking about hitting quota or getting product out the door stress, which in turn increases productivity. This is what inclusion is all about, making all employees, no matter who they are or how they see themselves, feel comfortable in their environment and able to do their jobs. Again, it's not easy. Cuban later concludes, if you don't think there is a need for DEI and it doesn't create a competitive advantage for your company, just look at the posts, replies, and quotes below. These are the same people that work for you or are your coworkers. Everyone is entitled to their point of view, but these same feelings, even if they are not said out loud, are heard loud and clear at work. End quote. And I'll link to that thread in the post's replies and quotes below. Spoiler alert, they're mostly terrible. Lots of fragile people acting like rich white guys have a monopoly on good ideas, which makes no sense. If necessity is the mother of invention, then poverty is the mother of innovation. I doubt the apartheid South Africa Emerald Mine Nepo baby ever suffered from need. And it's real rich getting a lecture on merit from guys like Elon Musk, who benefited from generations of white supremacist colonial extraction, hit on some bets with their ill-gotten house money, and then pretend wealth is the same as competence on all matters. Merit my ass. Oh, we don't need DEI. Look at all the progress we've made. Racism is over. I don't see color. They say these things in order to lock in their gains, to secure their inordinate share of the pie. When others demand a more equitable distribution, these insufferable, insecure pricks like Musk, Chris Rufo, and Charlie Kirk lose their shit because when you're accustomed to privilege, increasing equality feels like oppression. So in summary, despite attacks from far-right agitators, DEI programs are likely to be important for businesses, universities, and organizations of all kinds. First of all, it's the right thing to do, but it's also good for organizational morale, and perhaps most importantly, it's good for business, and in the end, we all know that's what it always comes down to. Thanks for listening. Thank you to my guest today, Eric Love, who can be found on LinkedIn and Facebook. His firm is Love Force Consulting. If you want to hear more from our conversation, which went 90 minutes, I'm going to try something new and release the deleted scenes as a bonus episode to paid subscribers. It'll be up in the next day or two. If you want access to that, get your ass on over to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. In addition to Substack, you can find me on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at HoosLeft, and on most other social media sites at ScottRog78. If you want to send me a message, slide up in my DMs on social media or email me at scottrog78@gmail.com. Again, please help me grow this project with a financial contribution. Until next time, this has been the HoosLeft Podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.